Okay, so when we talk about leadership, I always love this quote by Charles Sandberg. Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. Hi, everyone. Welcome to yet another Woman in Leadership Spotlight month of October. Today, we are honored as we are joined by Executive Director of Sister in Islam, Rozana Isa. A little bit about Rozana. She came into the women's rights movement in Malaysia in 1999, serving as project coordinator at Women's Aid Organization, WAO. So she is currently in her 6th year serving as the Executive Director of Sister in Islam, an NGO advancing in the right of Muslim women within the framework of Islam, human rights, constitutional guarantees, and lived reality. Hi, Rozana. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. So before we start, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Okay, thank you so much, Amiera, and thank you, Women's Aid Organization, for having me. Very surreal, given that I used to work at WAO myself more than 20 years ago. Yeah, a little bit more about myself. Yeah, I came, I actually studied to be an accountant. So this was particularly an experience that I thought so it wasn't something that I planned to do. I really wanted to perhaps, go into the corporate sector, but it wasn't an opportune moment because I came back from overseas at a time when Malaysia was going through its economic crisis in 1997, 1998. And I, worked elsewhere for a little while, but then this position in Women's Aid Organization, was beckoning me, and I thought, okay, why not? Because it was a one-year contract as the project coordinator, monitoring the implementation of the, I think it was monitoring of the DVA. So it was a project that I worked with the ED at that time, Ivy Josiah, and also another project implementer. And I've never looked back since. So I've been in this field this year for 24 years. And it's been very, very enriching and rewarding. And I've learned so many things just being a part of the women's group and the women's movement. Yeah.
Now, so from corporate, you went straight to social non-profit, and you don't have regret.
No regrets.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once or twice I've been like, when things are very challenging and don't move, no changes, me like, why am I doing this? So that question will come, lah. It's like, why am I doing this? But nevertheless, I think it's knowing that at the end of the day, we're the work that is being done by groups like WAO and Sisters in Islam is a much needed work to be done on the ground, and that's something that roots you in what you believe in terms of women's rights and gender equality. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. For information, we are live stream on Facebook, and those who are watching on Facebook, please feel free to ask questions in the comment section, and I'll read before we end the session. So let's move on to the first question. Please share with
Mhm.
us your work with Sister in Islam and what is your role.
Okay. So Sisters in Islam is an organization founded by 8 women who came together, and they wanted to learn really what does the religious text, the Quran and the Hadith, says about women's rights in Islam. Because at the time, they came across women, who came to tell them that they were not experiencing justice in the Sharia courts. And the founding members, were journalists, were reporters, artists, academics, lawyers, women's rights activists. And so they took this to heart, and they knew that they had to work on and engage with the authorities at that time, Pusat Islam, to see how implementation of the Undang-Undang Keluarga Islam, Islamic Family Law 1984, can be better implemented, given that there were all these kinds of feedbacks that were given to them. But at the heart, at the root of it all, dealing with the law is one thing, but at the end of the day, they wanted to learn for themselves, what does the Quran say about
Mm,
women's rights? And so that embarked them on a journey of coming together every week, to a study session where 8 of them gathered together to learn, how to read the Quran from women's perspectives. And this
mm,
is important because I think, people don't realize that, when we, with anything, we always come into it reading something with our own lived realities and understandings and experiences. And I think until now, doing this work for 24 years, I still think, men just don't get it, how it feels for women, to be, for example, um, if their husbands were to engage in a polygamous relationship, they won't
mm,
know what it feels like for women. And so this is the work of Sisters in Islam. Essentially, it's to ensure that, if laws and policies are going to be based on religious texts, on the Quran and the Sunnah, for example, then, how do we understand the text in order for it to be read from a position of justice and from understanding of, women's lived experiences? And how do we get those voices out there so that the women's lived experiences are taken into account, and therefore laws and policies can be made in ways that are more just to women, and that women are regarded as equal to men.
mm. Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It was such a great job that Sister in Islam does. And as a Muslim woman myself, I thank you all for doing this for us. So,
Thank you.
the next question is, how did you become a leader, and how do you measure success as a leader?
Um, it's when you gave me this question, even that question, I found it hard to. How did I become a leader? I suppose I was thrown into that situation.
Oh,
I guess.
okay.
No, no, no. So I was approached
Maybe you
to
can share a
ask.
little bit the journey.
Yeah, yeah. So I was approached to ask whether I wanted to lead Sisters in Islam. And it was a very it wasn't something that I took lightly.
Okay.
And I decided to consult with 4 people who were very important in my life at that time, particularly. And I took into account what they had to tell me and inform me. And I weighed the decision. It did take me quite a while. It wasn't a decision that I took lightly and made the decision immediately. I did take my time to think about it, because I realized the gravity of the work that Sisters in Islam is doing. And at that time, the organization was already undergoing the fatwa, and I had to also think about how this was going to impact myself personally, and even my family. But in the end, what also was motivational for me, because you had this question about the imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about it a little bit as well, because while I had doubts about whether I was capable, or whether I was capable or not to take up this position, in the end I thought, they could, the people who considered me for this position, they didn't take that job lightly either. I'm sure they must have given it considerable thought, because they had the organization's best interest at heart. And if they thought confidently that I could take up the role, then I thought, why don't I also give them a chance and trust in their judgment that I
Yeah.
could do it. And so that was how I came into this leadership position. I became the executive director of Sisters in Islam in 2016. And it's been definitely, even until today, it's a learning process. The things that you have to learn. There are some things that you learn on the job. There are some things that you kind of know what you need to do through observation. I consider myself very fortunate because I've been able to work under 3 executive directors of 3 different organizations. And so I've been able to observe them in many different situations and many different ways in terms of how they've had to deal with difficult decisions that they had to make, or whether they had to deal with really HR matters, membership matters, statutory obligation matters. So I think having been, in that environment was very useful in at least having a sense of what it what it took or what it needed to get the job done. And I still think I'm still unfolding. Yeah.
Okay, so you told that you were saying that you were working under 3 executive director, which all women. And
Yes.
what do you think are the greatest challenge, especially for as a leader, as a woman leader face?
Yeah.
And you,
Yeah, I think for my position, given that I've always worked with women's organizations from the beginning, I think it's perhaps a very different experience from, I think, maybe in other sectors where you have to deal with having male leadership in those structures. So I have to say that I will have to be very nuanced about my experiences. But I think one of the greatest challenges is always that thing about, wherever I was with these 3 executive directors in terms of decision making, it's always about, how do we be fair to everyone, given the what do you call this, the different circumstances, different positions, different strengths that people have, and I think that is really, this whole thing about being a leader is that having that ability to bring everyone together with you, to show them that that this is the mission or the vision, or the goal that we want to accomplish, and recognizing how everyone has different strengths, different abilities, and how they can use their different strengths and abilities to contribute to the mission at hand. And it's always a challenge to deal with different voices, diversity of voices. I think that is something, women are always, in a way, I don't know about male leadership, but in terms of women leadership, and I see this in women even in their roles as mothers, for example, you always have to weigh your decision regarding something in light of other people that's in the context with you. So it's never about yourself. It's really about who you're with, what you need to do, and how do we all do it together. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like woman leader and male leader have different point of view. So do you
Mm.
think that we need more women in leadership role, and
Oh,
why?
of course, definitely. Primarily because women have very, very specific experiences, specific biological experiences, and specific experiences that have to do with, past um, discrimination, current discrimination, current, structural dimensions of, patriarchy, whether it's within, formally in our structures, or whether it's through culture, or whether it's in, our practices, the way we do things. And I think, women certainly have, uh, women can, I think that there's a very high expectation of women to be able to consider other people's experiences, because that's what's expected. We're expected to do that. We're
Yeah.
expected to think of other people, and I think that is actually an advantage, to be a leader that considers all perspectives, all angles, and all the people that they have to deal with. And also because women's experiences are not being talked about enough.
Yes.
And I think this is something that we see quite evidently in terms of, I think when it comes to political leadership, people are very quick to dispute, like male leaders, or compare women leaders to male leaders, and expect a whole load out of her. But that when it comes to male leadership, you don't have those criterias. You don't measure men so stringently and strictly as you do women. And this is something that is a disadvantage to us, because then we will easily overlook women's capabilities of actually being able to contribute better, if not as well as their male counterparts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with
And yeah. And also, like all kinds of policies that need to be made at the decision making level. So for example, would men understand issues about violence against women? Would they understand issues about,
you.
sexual harassment? I mean, compared to 20 years ago when I started this work, I think we've definitely come a long way. We do see a lot more men coming on board to support, women's rights issues, gender equality issues. But it's still not enough. It's still not enough, especially when you look at the political leadership level. I think, we can definitely have better policies and laws for women in Malaysia. There are still so many things that women still do not have their rights recognized. And if you're going to not understand women's experiences is in undergoing these challenges, you'll never be able to see. You were doing policies with like close one eye lah. You don't see the whole big picture. You don't see the impact that's going to take place for the future generations that is to come. So many issues. Okay, Amira, child marriage, Malaysian women being able to transfer citizenship to their children who are born overseas. Those are the two critical issues right now. And if we don't take them seriously, we don't address them, we're going to see younger generation of Malaysians who are going to be further and further disadvantaged. And they just do not have the means to be able to access rights anywhere and anywhere in a way that is effective. Their rights will not be guaranteed. Right to documentation, being a Malaysian citizen, being able to have documents that can ensure that you get into schools, you get education, you are able to go to work, you are able to do things that people like you and me probably take for granted every day. But statelessness is not an issue that should be lightly taken. And especially if we've got younger and younger women who are getting pregnant, if they are not aware of what they need to do in terms of registering their children to get a birth certificate, identity card, then their children are also going to be stateless, and then further disadvantaged and left behind in society.
Yeah. I totally agree. So, wow. So, moving on, you have studied and lived abroad. How has that shaped your view on female leadership, especially in the context of Malaysia?
Yeah, I like this question, and I think I have to honestly say that my observation and experience of women leadership, female leadership, is really shaped by local experiences rather than overseas experience. So I went to an all-girls school,
Mm.
and you in an all-girls school, you just have that room and space to just take the lead, essentially. And you don't, question yourself about whether, a boy can do this better, because it's all women there, it's all girls there, right? So that has been I think a very grounding experience, because you become confident in your own abilities, no matter, how big or small they are. And you are always, willing to, in an all girls school, I think, you are willing to make room for people, make room for each other, listen to the diversities of experiences and learn from one another. And then, of course, like, being part of women's groups, I think that has definitely shown, the varieties of female leadership. And what I learned from those two experiences, leadership is not necessarily about being the leader, but it's
Mhm.
really about how you take ownership of the things that you need to do, and to
Mhm.
be able to do them well, and to bring people along with you, to build community with you, to get people excited and interested. And I think that's one example of leadership as well. Another thing I have to say, though, what has also concretized me in the idea of female leadership is actually just looking, from a young age, just looking at them, at my family and relatives, because my aunts were all mostly single mothers.
Mhm.
Their husbands had died, way before them. And basically you're looking at, my aunts and grand aunts, they are the ones who make decisions,
Yeah.
important and key critical decisions in their families. And so they are the head of the households. They decide what needs to be done. And they also not only contribute, in all kinds of discussions within the family, but also at the community levels. They're very involved in whatever, committees that they were a part of, and their voices are always. So I think this whole idea of women being there and taking charge has been there, from the very beginning of my life. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
And what
no, no, it's
go
okay. Yeah.
and I want to say that, right now, the women who inspire me the
Mhm.
most are the women who are um, taking on this role of demanding, equal citizenship rights for them and their children. I mean, you see them, coming out, speaking out, sharing their experiences, really owning the issue. And I know it's hard and tough for them, and I know that, they also face all kinds of, backlashes, people, attacking them online and telling them very, very unkindly, what they should have done, should not have done, who they should have married or not married or whatever. But I think, they are really uh they've done so much in terms of making all of us aware that, this is an issue that affects every woman across the board in Malaysia, regardless of your ethnicity and religion.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. I just need to take a moment like to sort all. Okay, so you know about glass ceiling, right? And
Mm.
we always heard this, like we can go so much, but there's always like this glass ceiling. And what do you think it takes to break it, especially for us as a woman?
Yeah, I think, yeah, this is a very good question. And I think different sectors will probably have different challenges. I think with, us being quite privileged working with mostly women, there are ways in which for us to recognize women's leadership in terms of the various kinds of roles women can take within NGOs, within sectors, to speak on the issues and lead a project, lead a program, and so on. I think in the corporate sector, though, the challenges are quite different. To what extent, the structures are very what do you call this, patriarchal, very structured, and the kinds of challenges they face in terms of making sure that, you know, they get recognized, you know, because essentially they are competing with another gender. That's what it is. And to what extent, you know, their experiences as women, you know, is recognized regardless of their gender. I think that's the part that's quite difficult. So I will not underplay or undermine that particular challenge, because I think, as we see, you know, we do have a lot of, I think there are initiatives like Lean in Malaysia, the 30% club, you know, trying to get, you know, women leadership, you know, up there and out there across the board. And I think, you know, policies like the Securities Commission, you know, doing sanctions against companies not making, you know, not having women at the board of directors level. All of that, I think, all those efforts are much needed and necessary. But you know, and I think it will be a good idea to also speak to people from within the corporate sector in terms of how else they see, you know, what else they need to do, because their challenges having to compete with men is very, 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 very hard. And I will acknowledge also, you know, there are certain things that, you know, the informal ways that women and men socialize, and those opportunities for those socialization makes a difference towards, you know, how people, how you are seen or not seen. You know, you can be, you know, doing equal amount of work, but you know, if you are socializing in spaces where, you know, women are not overtly welcomed, or you know, or in certain sports, I don't know, no, I have heard of, you know, colleagues who worked in the corporate sector, you know, for them, they said, you know, I go out there to the golf range and I go out there to play golf as well, and make sure like this is a skill, because I know that decisions are being made, you know, at the on
Yeah.
the golf course, you know. And so women know, you know, to a certain extent, you know, it's not just about how hard they have to work, but how hard they have to work to be seen, for who they are and what they can bring, and that's a very human, um, factor, you know. And how do we also create spaces where then women can be seen for, not only what they do and what they can bring, but for who they are, and the different kinds of talents, that they can bring, to their company and organization. I think, earlier this year we spent some time with Yayasan Saim Dabi, for the International Women's Day, and I think one of them, you know, conveyed this very, very interesting experience about, you know, wanting to be posted elsewhere. I think, was it the Papua New Guinea or something, and her conversation in terms of how, you know, she had to really, because she was seen, but at the end of the day, it's also then, when you are seen, you know, how do you even eventually even step up to that role, and so the kind of support that you need from your family to take up those positions. So for women, you know, sometimes the opportunity is there, but if your family is not supportive of that, then that can also be a very difficult thing. So women's challenges, even if it's at work, is not just at work, it's also like in the family as
Yeah,
well. Yeah.
true. So we
Yeah.
really need to have a strong support system with us.
Strong support system is one. The other thing that I also want to, I mean, I recognize, yeah, because I do attend some, you know, events, and women leaders are always asked, you know, how do you get there? You know, what did you have to do in order to get to the position? And there's no doubt that they had to work very hard. There's
Mhm.
no doubt about it. But at the same time, what I found interesting is that, you know, they're also not outwardly acknowledging if there is any discrimination that's happening in those structures. So they always relate back to their personal experiences, and we don't, you know, what we are still kind of need to do is to be able to identify and name systemic discrimination, and how do we, because systemic discrimination is not something that you can address alone. Systemic discrimination is something that you need to actually be able to tell your story to people. You need to be able to build that community so that you can address that systemic discrimination as a group, as a community. Doing it all alone is very daunting, and like you said, that support system is much needed in order for us to be able to do that, which is why, I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about Women's Aid and Sisters in Islam is that we are also a part of a joint action group for gender equality. We're not doing this on our own. Support for one another is actually very important and much needed. Yeah.
Wow, okay, thank you for that. So, okay, this is a good question. Do Muslim women face unique barriers compared to women of other faiths when it comes to leadership?
This is a very interesting question as well. Yeah. How do I? Okay, let me kind of break this down into, because
Okay.
there are several layers to it.
All right.
I think in the first place, Malaysian women face barriers to begin with,
Okay.
and we see this happening at the political level,
Mhm.
at the corporate level. We also see this perhaps, in certain critical areas where a lot of women are there, but then when it comes to the leadership level, not a lot of women are there.
Mhm.
For example, in the school system, university education system, and then mm, in the community, I think, you do see women, a lot more women, especially those who play the role as members of women's political wing. I mean, they are the movers and shakers on the ground. They get
Yeah.
things done.
Yeah.
These women are amazing, the way that they can move, any particular event with, with what they do. And yet, when it comes to the political leadership, do they, has any of the political parties, achieved 30% women at the leadership level? Definitely, when we look at the last general elections and the last state elections in August, I think it was only Muda that fielded, 50% women in their as nominees, as candidates. But then again, the numbers are still very small. But when you look at the other political parties, barely. I think most of them would probably achieve maybe less than 30%, right? And so this is really, really frustrating. So what more? When you look at women, for Muslim women, when it comes to leadership, we it's a very schizophrenic situation to say the least, primarily because we have always been told bahawa suami itu adalah ketua keluarga.
Yes.
All right, okay. When in reality, like I told you, like me growing up looking at my aunts and my grand aunts, like they are the head of the families, even though they may not term themselves as that way, but essentially that's who they are. And then when you look at and a lot of what we have been taught about, husband and wife relationships is really about how, men are the providers and protectors, and therefore and this is based on a Quranic text,
Mhm.
Surah An-Nisa verse 34, that talks about men being providers and protectors, and therefore they are a degree over women, and therefore women owe them their obedience. And if women owe them their obedience, and if they are disobedient, then the men can actually lift their hand to address the situation. And so this is all how the work that we are all doing, WAO and CIS, is coming together really in terms of really does Islam actually support domestic
Yeah.
violence? Yeah. But when we unpack and look at the lived realities, and this is where the understanding of the context today really gives meaning to the text that we need to understand as well. And I think for women, they are still struggling with that, um, taking up that role and that space and that recognition that they are the ones who are heads of their family. So there is this thing that's happening with, because we did a survey in 2019, a national survey on the perceptions and realities of Muslim women in Malaysia. And so for them, it's like, they said it's much more easier for me to play my role as a leader in my workplace, because I'm a head of department, manager, and so on and so forth. And men in the office recognize that, this is my role and how I have to play it. What are the how I play my role as a leader, and people are okay with it. But then when she comes back to the house, she has to switch on this hat, to it's like, an expectation that you may be a leader at the office, but when you come home, you are definitely not a leader at all. It's, your husband that is a leader of the family. When, we also know that there are so many women who are the providers and protectors of their
Yeah.
family, that they are the ones who are making sure that their households run well. When, there are also, many husbands and fathers who are not paying maintenance, who have been instructed to pay maintenance to the children but still not. And so this is the part where I talked about the systemic discrimination, that, women really need to come together to say that, um, then there must be a recognition of women as head of households. And we saw the disaster, of what happened during the COVID, right, during the lockdown, and government made this policy of only heads of the families could go to the supermarket and do the shopping, and how lost the men were because they've never had to do it. And the supermarkets, quickly extended their help, by, printing all kinds of posters, what is this vegetable and that vegetable and whatever. And it's so interesting how, people come to address that particular difficulty and situation for men. But, for women, we are all expected to know like the back of our hand, ini sayur apa, ini ikan apa, right? Um, so yes, so it is hard, for Muslim women when there is an expectation in the textual sources that I talked about just now, and this is definitely transferred to the societal level, not only at the family but also at the community. And so that is the main key about, women being told, okay, you may be this and that, tapi jangan lupa tempat you sebenarnya bila balik rumah dekat dapur. And it's very demeaning, because it sounds like as if being in the kitchen is, such a limited and a bad thing, when, it's actually a very important role. And so in fact, if anything, in this day and age, both women and men should take their places, wherever they are in the homes, in the kitchen, because, we need to cooperate and make sure that, we do what we can together, so that we can also leave the house together and, work with ease, work with, a peaceful mind, and not have the dread of, thinking bila aku balik nanti aku nak kena masak, aku nak kena jemput anak, aku nak kena buat laundry, nak kena lipat kain. It's the double burden and the triple burden is astounding. What more for those families that also have to look after their elderly parents or parents-in-law.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so Oh, we almost running out of time. What more would you like to see from women in Malaysia, and what can men do to support us?
Women, tell your stories. I think social media has offered spaces, for women to, let themselves, share their experiences, and what they go through, which is all good and great. But there's also, social media can also be negative when people attack you for whatever it is that you're sharing. So it's really pros and cons. It's really having to navigate, what kind of experiences you want to share. But I still believe in the power of stories, and that they can make a difference in terms of letting somebody else know that, so I'm not alone. I'm going through, there's somebody else that's also going through the experiences that I am. But we should also tell stories in terms of, how we, what kind of help we got. Those kind of vulnerabilities is actually important for women to know that, I don't have to do this on my own, that I can reach out for help. Whether it's through organizations like the ones that we serve, or organize, or even individuals, who have the time and capacity to provide that kind of support. I would definitely encourage women to build communities, be there for one another, and to recognize and name the discrimination that they are facing, whether it's in terms of, cultural discrimination, whether it's in terms of, the barriers that they are facing at work. Talk about it, and figure out how to change these things systematically, because systemically, because it's really systemic change that we want to happen in Malaysia. Anything, even with cultural discrimination as well, it's systemic change that needs to happen. But we, probably would have to have some experiences, maybe how to figure out, how do we organize, how do we mobilize, how do we get, give support to one another. And yeah, I really think, women, what I've seen from political parties, women's wings of political parties, is that women do come together.
Mhm.
And I think from women's NGOs too, we do come together. But how do we also make sure that more women come together in the spaces that they are already in, facing the different kinds of discrimination that they have, that they are facing in their lives, and to, it's really about action. I think the work that the message that we want to get out there is, change is necessary,
Yes.
change is possible. Don't do it alone. Find your community, build your community, and don't be afraid. I think, the more voices raised, the better, because if we don't speak up, nobody else is going to speak up for us.
I love that. I love that so much. Talk, share your story. This change is possible.
Change is possible, and it is necessary. And I think, and in order for change to happen, we need action. We can't just manifest change. It really
And,
has to be action oriented. Yeah.
okay, so one last question. What is your hope for others women climbing their way up? I mean, what do you advise? Can you give?
Believe in yourself. If
Mhm.
somebody doubts you, they're only one voice. I'm sure if you look for the support that you need, you will find that more people believe in you, And perhaps, you know, more people believe in you than you believe in yourself. You know, there's something you know, in the way we are brought up, or within society, you know, or women never good enough or whatever. No, don't take that standing up, lying down, whatever, you know, that's really nonsense. Believe in yourself, because, you know, women do great things. And sometimes it's not about doing one great thing, you know. Sometimes it's about doing small things well and
Mhm.
consistently, and then that will definitely build up. I mean, one of the things that I've been doing this year, I've been doing a lot of reading all this leadership, and, you know, all kinds of books lah, podcasts lah, whatever like that. But really, the message that I got in terms of, you know, how do we improve ourselves, you know, because we really try to be as um perfect as we can, and then after that we sometimes get a bit um we freeze ourselves, because like it becomes too big or too daunting to overcome. And it's really that whole thing about, you know, it's not about being 100% better than yesterday. It's just about being 1% better than yesterday. That's
Being
all it
1%
takes. Just be
better.
1% better than yesterday. And you're
Okay.
not competing against anybody else. It's just compete with yourself.
Yeah, I love
Yep.
that. I always believe in that word.
Nice. Nice.
So thank you so much, Rosanna, for your inputs and your sharing for today. And thank you everyone for joining from Facebook. Maybe we can say bye from Facebook people. I don't see any question. So we can wrap up this session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Amira. Thank you, WAO, for having me.